Hamish. I was born in 1757 in County Antrim, Ireland. You may know that as the area of Belfast today. Have you been there, madam?
No, but my family came from there.
Right. You must be in East Tennessee.
I've moved around.
Okay. I had a brother, James and William, and in 1772, James and William and I met a seafaring captain who told us about this new promised land of America and promised us safe passage, and all we had to do was give him all of our earthly possessions. And seeing that we didn't have very much, that seemed like a good deal to us, so we gave him what little we had except for the clothes on our back and began the passage to America. We were 34 days on the ship being tossed about the sea, surviving on putrid water and salted pork. After 34 days and seeing land off the bow, the captain came to us and told us that we had been on sea an extended amount of time, and therefore we owed the captain more fare. Being that we had nothing of value among us, the kind governor of the colony of Pennsylvania, Governor Spotswood, had offered to pay the remaining amount of our passage in return for a 7-year indenture, at the conclusion of which he would give us 200 acres of land in Virginia. Seeing this as a good deal and wanting to get off the boat, we readily agreed. So we worked the 7 years in the iron ore fields for the good governor, at which time we received 200 acres of farmed out land. I attempted to grow the two staples of life, tobacco and corn. Corn fed the livestock. Corn fed your family, and corn made a really good cough medicine, sir. The tobacco we exported to England. Our Native American friends introduced us to this herb, the tobacco plant, and our English brothers found it most agreeable. As things began to change in the colonies and the wind of war began to blow, my brothers and I volunteered with the Virginia militia. As you can see on my stone, I became a sergeant. We followed General Washington around Pennsylvania, New Jersey, even to New York, down into our native Virginia. And after 8 grueling years, finally the French who had come into the struggle, Admiral de Grasse, had the French Navy blocked to where they couldn't rescue Cornwallis, who was trapped on the peninsula at Yorktown. French General Rochambeau and General Washington had him pinned by land. I never will forget General Washington calling for volunteers to raid British Redoubt number 10, and my brothers and I readily agreed to go storm this at midnight with Alexander Hamilton as our leader. As we were charging up that hill and through the abattis, a shell exploded not far away, and it nearly severed my brother James' arm. I tore off my shirt trying to stop the bleeding, and James pleaded with me as I carried him to a surgeon, "Don't let them give my arm to the worms." The surgeon took a look at him and said, "The arm has to come off." And I said, "No." He said, "Get him out of here. He's going to die anyway. He's a dead man." So I took him to a nearby farmhouse, and the lady of the home and I nursed him, and James' fever began to get high, and the arm began to smell. You could hardly stand to be near him. And I remembered something that General Washington's surgeon, Bato Otto, had said, "Let the flies blow it." So we let the flies blow it, and as the maggots appeared and began to eat away the rotting flesh, James' fever began to subside. James recovered, and he was always proud that he still had his arm. Even though he didn't have full use of it, he still could use the arm, and he still had his arm. At the conclusion of the war, the Continental Congress had promised all of us that had served a land grant. The state of North Carolina had deeded this area back to the U.S. government. It was the area known as the territory south of the River Ohio, and here was our land grant. So myself and the two brothers came here in 1785. Greenville was a town just 2 years old. In 1810, I met Jane Wilson. And we married and had 3 precious children, and my precious Jenny sleeps beside me today. I continued to farm and grow that corn. Then on January the 4th of 1840, a very cold evening, I left my earthly remains that have been here for the last 171 years. Any questions? Okay.
You got any samples of that corn? That'd be good, wouldn't it?
Be nice. We maybe tomorrow night.
Yeah, there you
It's
go.
gonna be cold tomorrow night.
There you go.
Any other questions?
Well, as you can see by the signage and the headstone, my name is Sam Milligan, and I was born here in Greene County in November 16th, 1814. My family, even though they owned 100 acres about 9 miles from here north toward Kingsport, which would be your town today, we were still kind of chained to poverty. We lived hand to mouth. We were farm laborers and day laborers for our sustenance, and education was very difficult to achieve out in the county. There were just a few schools, and even when there was a school open, we could only attend during the dead of winter when the weather was so harsh that we couldn't be doing farm work. Now, my father wanted us all to have an education, and he had some books and he borrowed some books, but we could only study after we'd worked hard on the farm all day, and it made it a little difficult. But I was the baby. I was the 5th of 5 children, and so from time to time I would get some special treatment. And on one occasion, an Elihu Asber, a pious Quaker, decided to conduct an English grammar class way out in the county. And it was going to be a 6-week session, and it was, by today's standards, a college prep course. And several people were going to attend who were planning to get into Greenville College, by the way, but it cost $5, and I did not have $5. But my older brother, who had been saving money for a planned trip, had decided to use his $5 to pay for my education. And that 6 weeks with Mr. Asber changed my life from many perspectives. When I finished that class, I was able to teach school. At age 16, I started teaching other children. It didn't pay very well, but it helped me with my own educational process in a great deal. But while I was there, I told you, I met these folks that were going on to Greenville College. And I have to admit, even though it grates my religion a bit, I was very jealous of them and somewhat covetous of their position. And I shared this with a few people. I shared it with a minister. And he said, well, you know, you should go down to Greenville and talk to President Henry Hoss. He's very interested in young men who are trying to get an education in this region, and he might find a way to help you out. So I put on the very best homespun clothes I had that sort of fit me, and a pound of bread and some bacon, and I headed off to Greenville because I knew I was going to spend the night if I come down here. And I visited college, got arrived at Greenville College mid-morning, and President Hoss took me on a tour. And the classrooms were in session, and it was amazing. And he could tell when I was interested in a particular topic, and he would let me stay in there a little longer. And finally, by mid-afternoon, we arrived in the library, and I had never imagined a place on God's earth that had this many books, and these treasures just absolutely painted the walls. He could see my interest, and I was pulling books and looking at topics and just kind of almost running like a wild child around that room. He pulled his watch out and said, you know, I have an appointment for a couple hours. I think I'll leave you here and you can entertain yourself until I come back, and I'll come back time for supper. And it was dark before he come back. I was holding books up to the window to try to read and ascertain what was there. And that night at supper, he took me to his house, and he offered me a proposition that really did change my life forever, that I could attend Greenville College and pay for the board and the education after I got out, after I graduated, and become gainfully employed. I absolutely agreed immediately to do that, and within just a few years while I was attending Greenville College, I became a teacher there, a professor, and was teaching. But I wanted to study law, and I needed more topics, and so I transferred over to Tusculum Academy under Samuel Doak. And so after 9 years, in 1843, when I was 29 years old, I graduated from Tusculum Academy and come into Greenville and started reading law and assisting at the law firm of Robert McKinney. And I did that for 2 years, and I was able then to pass my exam and get my license to practice law on my own. So in 1845, I opened my own practice, and it was going extraordinarily well for 2 years, very fortuitous. And I was preparing to get married, and the Mexican War broke out. And President Polk asked me to become the quartermaster of the Mexican War, and he offered me a rank of major, which paid well. And so I did. I went to Mexico with lots of Greene County gentlemen, by the way, that fought in that war and participated. And you know, while I was there, I served at Veracruz and Jalapa, and was there for about a year and a half. But as soon as I got back to Greenville, I married the love of my life, who lived in a huge house that sit right here where Town Hall is today, Elizabeth. And we had Elizabeth Howard, and we had 6 children and a wonderful life. I took a job immediately, not as a lawyer this time or attorney, but as the editor of the Greenville Spy, which was a Democratic newspaper. And it was very prosperous and fortuitous, and the area was growing in commerce. And in 1851, I purchased my father-in-law's house for my family. He wanted to sell it, and I purchased it in 1851. And during the 1850s, Greene County prospered mightily, and the railroad was completed here, more commerce come in. And in 1860, I was asked to become a justice with the state Supreme Court, and I accepted. And it was a wonderful year. I had enjoyed the work, and but suddenly toward the end of the year, the entire state, in fact the entire South, went into complete turmoil when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And Andrew Johnson wrote me a letter and asked me to come back to Greenville in East Tennessee to participate with him in speaking and stumping to keep this state in the Union. And I agreed, and in December and January, he and I worked the entire state, but we spent a lot of time here in East Tennessee, speaking in private meetings and public meetings to get people to stay in the Union. Late in January, I was given an opportunity to take my efforts to save the Union to a next level. There was a peace conference that had been scheduled in Washington, D.C. on February 4th, and I agreed to be a delegate at that meeting. There was going to be 100 delegates, 14 free states and 7 slave states had agreed to participate in that peace conference. And on the very day that that peace conference started, which was February 4th, at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., the Confederate government convened its first government meeting in Montgomery, Alabama, and formed its government on that day. We deliberated in Washington for 3 weeks. We developed several amendments to the Constitution that we thought would be very inviting and helpful in the cause to pull the states back together and keep the Union together. We had agreed that Congress would not pass any legislation to change the state of slavery as it existed at that moment in time. We agreed to extend the Missouri Compromise line to the Pacific Coast. We agreed that states had to uphold the fugitive slave law, and if they didn't, we would pay the slave owner 100% of the value of that slave. Now, the provision that I embraced the most was that we would prohibit any foreign slave trade between our country and any other country, and it would end at that point. It went to the Senate, and they killed it almost immediately. You've heard the term dead on arrival. This was truly dead on arrival. They voted 28-7. It never made it to the House of Representatives for deliberation. And by this time, we're into March, and within 6 weeks, the Great Civil War is upon us. The firing of Fort Sumter, Lincoln calling for troops from the southern states, and so the Great Civil War was upon us. And there was nothing to change that. Things were in great turmoil in Tennessee, and particularly in East Tennessee, because on June 8th, even though the state voted to separate from the Union and join the Confederacy, East Tennesseans had voted 2-1 against that. And almost immediately they brought in Confederate troops, martial law, to protect the railroad bridges and the other Confederate interests throughout this region. There were thousands of troops here, several hundred in Greenville alone. I went on back to Nashville to do my job as justice. And in November, there were rumors of a federal invasion coming into Tennessee. Well, I was heartened by the possibility. I had no inside information. I did not know, just the rumors. And locally, there were Unionists that had planned and then went ahead and burnt bridges to help deter the Confederates when that invasion took place. Well, they burned the bridges, but the invasion never took place. The Federal Army never showed up here in November of 1861, and they dealt with those bridge burners extraordinarily harshly. There were two gentlemen, Mr. Fry and Mr. Henshaw, were tried in a drumhead court-martial right down the street here. And 2 hours after they were convicted of participating in the bridge burning, they were hanged on an oak tree right beside the train depot, and you could see their bodies hanging there from my house, and they hung there for well over a day. It was a reprehensible sight, and it was the image of things to come here in Greenville. And we were insulted one more time. Many times the town changed hands, but whenever General Longstreet occupied this whole region, several of his officers come to my house and demanded to be billeted there for the winter, the entire winter. I couldn't refuse. I knew they would throw us out if we refused and take the house anyhow. And they had people camped all over my garden, all over my lawn, and they stayed there until till late February, early March of 1864. What they didn't know is I had stashed all of our grain in the porch columns and hidden all of our family valuables in a concealed ceiling, in a false ceiling that you could not see easily with the naked eye. So we made it okay. 1864 passed quickly, and I got another letter from Andrew Johnson in early 1865 inviting me to Nashville. He was a military governor at the time. It was time to amend the state constitution with the results of the war. And on February 22nd of 1865, I was elected to head the committee that would develop the anti-slavery article for our Constitution, the state of Tennessee. And I did that with this hand, and it was the proudest achievement of my entire career that I was able to do that. And it was ratified in the state. It was ratified by the General Assembly, and the people of the state ratified as well. Things calmed down after the war. I was still a justice for the state Supreme Court. Andrew Johnson became president, and in 1868, just as I was finishing my term as a justice for the state Supreme Court, had a few months to go, Andrew Johnson wrote me another letter and said he wanted to nominate me as a judge for the Court of Claims for the United States in Washington. And I said, please do. I think that would be wonderful. And the Senate confirmed me in July of 1868, and I went to Washington. Now, just about the Court of Claims, up until 1855, if anyone had a monetary claim against our government based on a bad law, a regulation, or a contract that had gone awry, you actually had to petition Congress for a settlement. And they had to conduct hearings, issue summonses, hire commissioners, and do all kinds of things. They had to do each one of them themselves. They established this court of claims with 3 judges, a very powerful position. And we were allowed to hire commissioners, issue subpoenas, and so forth. Well, as you can tell by my conversation here, most of my life was spent in public service, and most of my life was actually spent away from Greenville, either in Nashville or Washington. And my greatest desire was to return to this place and to this home, and that request was honored when I died April 20th, 1874. They brought me back to my backyard, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm so happy that you come to visit with me this evening. Thank you.
Will you play that again? Because I had the mic plugged up here.